So this means that what I'm going to talk about and present is really, it will be mostly focused on the design and the motivation under a new data collection. So you're going to see a lot of that and a bit less of evidence and models and so on. But hopefully we think these things are important because by collecting better data and designing different questions, we can learn many things about how family members make decisions under uncertainty and interact with each other and so on. So this is kind of the main idea. So, but to provide some motivation for this, I want to start from a different data collection, which I did 2-3 years ago, because I also have been working on this topic for a bit, which this new data collection I'm going to talk about today builds on, okay? So this data collection, both this one, the old one, and the new one I'm going to talk about today, are both in a way narrow and broad. So they are narrow because they focus on a specific topic. As you saw, the topic is family choice of the high school track in a schooling system with curricular stratification. But it's also broad, especially the new one, the new data collection, because we are really trying to cover many aspects of it, many channels, many mechanisms that may determine the choices that we observe. And also it's broad because we hope to learn something that can be useful also for other decision-making domains and topics within economics of the family and how family members make decisions, okay? So I need to tell you a little bit about what this choice is about so that you understand where I'm coming from. So here I'm focusing, so the data collection happened in a specific city in northern Italy. And so what you need to know is that in Italy, but it's not only about Italy, this is true also in other countries, the system is stratified in the sense that when children transition from junior high school to high school, they face this decision about the type of school, the track they need to pursue. And this choice that they make is going to carry consequences on what they will be able to do later in terms of going to college, what opportunities they are going to face on the labor market, and so on and so forth. If you are only familiar with the US system, think about this as college major choice, but push it back when children are during their adolescence, and imagine how much uncertainty they face, and how tough can this choice be given the specialization they face. And of course, there is the additional problem that since these kids are adolescents, it's not clear what roles they play versus their parents in the choice. So we are used to models in which either children are children, and so their parents are the decision makers, or children become adults, and then they become the decision makers. Here, we are wondering about kind of the middle ground. So the transition from parents being the only decision makers to children being the main decision makers, okay? And what I want you to take from this table, which is based on my previous data collection, are a couple of things. So one thing you need to understand of this data collection a main limitation of this data collection relative to the new one I'm going to talk about today, is that it had a big limitation in terms of design, because as Flavio was saying this morning, there was a big limitation in budget. And so what I did there was I went to see these kids and parents when they were in their first week of school in high school. So I observed their choices, and then I asked them retrospectively about their individual preferences and beliefs, how they were 3 months earlier when they made the decision. Obviously, a lot of criticism because this is all retrospective, and who knows, they may be biased in their reports and so on and so forth. On top of that, by doing that, I'm abstracting from the whole decision process and how, beliefs, preferences, and so on may evolve during the decision process and the interaction between children and parents. However, even by doing a data collection like that, so trying to take the snapshot as of the moment of the decision, you see that basically in 50%, half of the families, the choices that we observe are not, in these 3 cases, are not identical to the stated preferences of both children and parents. So in about 0.5% of the families, the choices we observe coincide with the stated preferences that parents and children report, and the two coincide. But in about half of the families, the preferences we observe coincide with only one of the two. So parents and children disagree, basically, even at the time of the decision. They haven't converged fully. They are not fully aligned. Okay, so this is what I want you to take.
Well, wait a minute, that's not the data collection problem.
No, I just want to motivate. So I'm telling you, even at the time of the decision, when we can claim there should be a lot of alignment because, you know, socialization started at 0, and anyway, they made the decision probably during the last year of junior high school, and they should be pretty much aligned. Even then, they are not. And the idea is that this motivates the new data collection, which is going to be instead prospective and is going to follow families during the year preceding the decision. Okay, this is the first point. The second point is that I document quite a bit of heterogeneity in terms of how families make decisions. So the idea is that, you know, both children and parents have some roles. In some families, children have more role than parents. In other families, they interact. Interesting enough, in the data, you don't see the case in which the parent and the child declare that the parent made the decision by themselves or on their own or you know, are the main decision makers. So what we observe is that in most cases, they make the decision jointly somehow, or the child made the decision. However, with the new data collection, we want to delve a little bit more into that, because it's true that the children may have a major role, but it's also true that parents may have many indirect ways to affect children. And so this is what we're going to delve into in the new data collection. The other point that I want to make as a motivation is that in that data collection, I gather some data about what children and parents know about each other. Do they know about each other's preferences and beliefs and so on? It's data that I haven't used in the main paper that came out of that data collection, but I think it's interesting, and Marco is going to talk more about that, meaning in terms of, you know, the assumptions that we make when we model child-parent interactions and child-parent decision-making, the informational structure within the family. And what I found, just, you know, very preliminary evidence there, is that parents know much more than their children about their children's preference than their children know about their parents' preferences. But information is far away from being perfect. Okay, Marco is going to talk more about that. Just want to give some motivation. So in terms of the research I did with that data collection, I do something very limited, which is, well, if we have information on individual stated preferences of family members, if we have information on their beliefs, and we have some information about the decision rules that they choose, can we separate and quantify the effect of preferences, beliefs, and decision rules from different family members in explaining the actual choices that we observe? However, it's very limited because I consider a very simplified framework, and as I said, I also focus on a very limited family of models of child-parent interactions. And in fact, I focus on a family of models that is more of, like, it's a cooperative type of approach. So what I assumed was that either one or the two or the other chose, or in fact, when they choose together, what they're really doing is just they're facing a problem of aggregating their beliefs and their preferences, but there is no strategic interaction possible. There is no parents having any effect on their children's choice set, and so on and so forth. So what we're going to do today, we're going to delve into these new additional channels, okay? So as I said, that study had many limitations. I already talked about the design. I mentioned that I collected beliefs data. Let me be a little bit more explicit about that. You may or may not be familiar with the collection of subjective expectations data pursued by many people, Chuck Mansky, Bob Willis, and other people interested in decision-making under uncertainty. So these questions are questions ask basically the respondents' percent chances that something will happen in the future. So they try to elicit probabilistic beliefs about uncertainty, about relevant outcomes or state of the world that are relevant to make decisions under uncertainty. In this specific case, our decision about schools. In other, research by other people can be can be choices about retirement, labor supply, other things, okay?
These are all hypothetical surveys without scoring rules?
Correct. So these are percent chance questions. So like, what do you think are the chances between 0 and 100 that...
Yeah, so you're listing
correct.
in PDF, but you're not using a scoring rule and there's no...
Correct, correct, yes. However, I'm going to show you that, again, I'm going to stay within that framework and that approach, but I'm going to make a little bit of an improvement relative to the design in which we force respondent to give one number. And then we model that as subjective risk in the sense that we use that number to say, well, respondents may have their own subjective beliefs, and they may be, they may deviate from rational expectations in the sense that they don't need to be the exact probabilities.
Sorry, you're saying
no, I understand. I understand what.
Well, you're eliciting subjective PDF distributions, right?
Correct.
Right.
Well, the problem is in most cases these are. It's correct what you're saying. It's even more restrictive than that because most of the times we need to focus on binary outcomes. But it's correct what you're saying. Yes, that's what you're doing. Yes. As I already said, I assume that everybody faces the same universal choice set. And so I really maintain the revealed preference kind of assumption that often is not made explicit, but the assumption includes the fact that people know everything about all the alternatives and that they consider all the alternatives. I'm going to move away from that. As I already said, I focus on cooperative type decision rules, but Marco is going to talk about more strategic interaction on cooperative type of decision rules. And then I had a limited coverage of the roles that teachers and friends may play in this choice. Unfortunately, given time constraint, I'm not going to talk about that at all today, but just wanted to mention, also because Joe, in the next presentation, is going to talk about adult, and you might be familiar with the network data of the network of friends in the adult data, and so I'm following a type of design similar to adult, and so to make sure that the friends of the respondents are in the sample too. And so we observe their choices and we elicit subjective beliefs about what their friends do and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, I'm not going to talk about this today, but just wanted you to be aware of that. And then we are hoping to also have some additional data on top of self-reported grades on standardized measure or tests. And also, I have a couple of questions, not a lot, on non-cognitive type of skills, so like a couple of personality measures. But I'm not going to talk about that today at all. Okay, so how do we improve it? I already said it, basically. Okay, and the idea is that I'm going to give you a 5-10 minutes overview about the data that we collect in this new survey. But then, given the topic of the conference, this audience, we would like to focus on two particular topics within this list. And one is the characterization of the choice set that these children face and choose from, and the particular role that parents, for example, may play in the choice set that children choose from. And then the other topic that Marco instead is going to talk about is this idea of modeling child-parent decision-making interaction within the framework of a principal-agent type of setup, and why it's hard to identify those models, and why maybe asking some questions along the line that you're asking in this survey may help gaining knowledge and information, learning something about that. Okay? So this is the overview. And I already mentioned it. So I'm going to give you the overview of the survey, and then we are going to focus on those two mechanisms for today. So here is the overview. So the data collection is done in Vicenza. For those of you who rightly may not know where it is and so on, is like a city in northern Italy, close and similar in many ways to the other city where I collected the previous data. The reason why I did the data collection there is because of funding. So local institutions and industrial organizations and so on were interested in the topic because when children graduate from high school, whether they did a technical school or a vocational school as opposed to a college prep school, they are very interested in the type of labor force they get and so on and so forth, so they were very happy to fund this thing. There is no claim here of being representative, at least not of being representative of Italy or anything like that. Here we are just trying to learn something, to ask questions and see whether these questions are useful, to learn something about models and behaviors we care about. And then the idea is that if we learn something useful, maybe we can transfer some of this data on large data sets like Joe is trying to do, that people, economists, other economists and social scientists can use, okay? So as I said before, this time we are taking a prospective approach. So instead of observing the final choice and then do the whole retrospective exercise, we look at people who are in 8th grade, that is the 3rd year of junior high school, at the beginning of 8th grade, and then we follow them 3 times before the decision, and then we observe them 1 time after the decision. We take the decision to be the pre-enrollment decision. Why this makes sense? Because the way it works in Italy is that during 8th grade, usually at the end of January, in this particular year it was moved down at the end of February, families need to make a pre-enrollment decision and say where do they intend to enroll and go. In fact, what you observe in practice is that in most cases people never change their mind. So that's kind of the main decision. Probably 2, 3, 5% at most sometimes change during the summer. So we take that as the decision of reference. And we observe them repeatedly in the hope of learning something about how this decision process evolved. And so we measure their preferences, beliefs, and constraints over and over again to see how these things evolve. And then, as I mentioned briefly before, we are hoping to link to some standardized test data. We're not sure we're going to be able to do that, so we'll see. There are 11 schools in Vicenza, in the municipality. 8 agreed to, at least in principle, participate, which means we could go walk in the school and talk with the students and ask them to take the survey home, to fill it in, to give it to their parents, to fill it in, and so on. So there were 2 surveys, one for the children, one for the parents. The children took 4 of them, the parents took only the first 3. In practice, about 60% of students agreed to participate, and their parents. So this is a bit of a difference relative to the previous studies, because in the previous study, we did the survey in the classroom. So basically, we almost had a 100%, 97% coverage of the children, but we still had a 60% coverage of the parents, because that's the coverage you get with this mode. But of course, we are gaining in terms of repeated observations and so on and so forth. And we gave them a little prize to participate, okay? So here is the structure of the survey. So wave 1 is the main wave that set the stage, and is the one that we are going to talk about today and provide evidence, because it's the only one we were able to start looking at the data. I have some people doing the data entry. This is paper and pencil, so I have some people doing the data entry for us, working on wave 3 and 4. So we only had the chance to look at wave 1 so far a little bit. What information are we collecting? I already told you, but basically, of course, we're going to collect we collected a bunch of information about child background and family background, usual stuff. But then, one thing that we were careful in collecting was this initial condition question. Let me explain what I mean by that. So before doing this survey, we did a little bit of a small group in-depth interviews to learn to do questionnaire survey development. And what we learned was that basically there are 2 types of students, it appears. Students who know what they want to do not since where they were born, but like when they start 8th grade, they know already, basically, pretty much. And students who never thought about it and don't worry until the last minute when they know they have a deadline and they need to worry about it, okay? So then we were a bit concerned about this initial condition problem of saying how much into the how much, this is like done or left?
So you have 30 minutes.
Okay, great, thanks. So the issue here is that how much into the decision process these kids are already. So we think that taking the snapshot at the beginning of 8th grade is the sensible thing to do, but we want to also have a sense of how much they thought about it, how much they invested in it already, how much they talked to other people about it, and so on. So we have a bunch of questions try to establish how invested they are in this decision already when 8th grade starts. Okay. And then we have this awareness question that I just want to mention. I'm going to show it to you later, both the survey question and so on, because it's basically one of the questions of that topic on choice set. Okay, so we want to know which alternatives among the available ones they know, they are aware of, that they exist. Okay, and we are going to repeat these questions and see whether it's like over time they gain more and more information and eventually they learn everything, or rather they are focusing on a few alternatives and they learn more and more and more about those, but in fact they tend to ignore the others. Okay. Then of course the big topic here is uncertainty, as I mentioned before. Remember that in the previous work I did, that was the whole point. The whole point was to say, within a framework of expected utility, how much is due to beliefs and how much is due to utilities, the choices that we observe. Here I'm making a little bit, hopefully, of an improvement on those questions, and then on the corresponding modeling. Oh, sorry, I'm actually got the wrong one. This one. In the following sense. So in the previous data collection, what I was doing was this. So for a number of outcomes or state of the words that we think are important to make the decision, because presumably they are consequences of the decision they are making, we ask them to give the number of chances out of 100 that a certain thing would happen if they made each choice. Okay. Now we are making an extension of the following type. We are allowing them not to be sure about their beliefs. And so to say, I gave you a number, and I'm pretty sure about it. Second order uncertainty in a way. I'm giving you a number, or maybe I'm not giving you a number, because of course they can do whatever they want, right? This is a paper and pencil, so I cannot force them to give me a number. But I'm not really sure about it. But I can say it's between here and here. So allowing for really ambiguity here, a range of beliefs.
It's not ambiguity.
It's not ambiguity. Okay. It depends on the lead.
Sorry?
Okay.
It's risk so far. It's just a PDF.
Well, but I don't know. I mean, it depends. I've seen different terminology in the literature. So remember that this is not objective. So it's not like...
No, it's a subjective probability
Correct.
distribution. If they then behave as if they're taking the weighted average of that, then it's subjective risk in the sense of savage. It's not ambiguity because they're giving you a distribution.
Well, but there is a range of, how do you call it? You call it risk even with the range of beliefs?
Well, it depends how they then process it. If the shape of the distribution matters for their decision, it's either uncertainty or ambiguity.
Okay, so I guess it depends on the model.
Correct.
The final model one uses. But, this is just data, but it would allow you to consider different models.
Correct.
Okay, fair enough. And then, of course, there is even a risky option, if you like. I give them the option to tell me, I have no clue whatsoever. It's a risky option from the researcher's point of view, because if they tell me this, what do I do with it? But we are learning. We are trying to learn, right? So, because we make the assumption all the time that, that they know and so on and so forth. And so this is informative. Also, I think it's interesting because, remember, this is not just one point. We are eliciting it 3 times. So as I was saying before, we are hoping to see what's the evolution like. Are they gathering more and more information about everything? Or the beliefs become more, they shrink, they become more precise. So they're more willing to give me a number and say, yes, I'm sure about it. Only on certain options they learn more about. So that's kind of the idea, what we want to see. Okay? And then, okay, so about the family decision-making process, we ask a number of initial things. So we ask what they think about, I don't want to talk too much about it because Marco is going to talk about it more, but the idea is like, what is their perception about their parents' preferences for them? Okay. Of course, in the previous data collection, it was retrospective. Okay. Here, instead, is done in probabilistic format because basically it's a future choice. So basically, the question is, tell me what do you think the first 3 choices of your parents for you are, and then how sure are you that those are them? So how much probability do you attach to that being the case? And then, again, I skip a bit quickly because I'm going to talk about it later, this idea of, do you think their parents would let you choose anything, or do you think they would put some constraints on the alternatives that you can choose? And this is one channel, one new channel that I was mentioning before. The other new channel is whether, parents give incentives to children. So like, the idea here, Marco is going to talk about it, but I want to give the motivation for why we decided to try this out. The motivation is that we actually know which families choose what. By that I mean that descriptively we know the the mapping between the socioeconomic characteristics and children performance in school and the choices that they make. What we are trying to do with these frameworks and models and data is to unpack that. So to understand whether that's due to pure taste or preferences, whether that's due to information and beliefs, to constraint or something else. And the reason why this mechanism could be important for curriculum choice is that we know that children who do better in school select into college prep tracks and so on and so forth. And one of the reasons why that's the case is that although this is family choice, so it's not like in Germany in which they test them and then they allocate them to tracks. Here is really like the family chooses where to enroll, or the child or the parents, that's what we are trying to establish. But there is also an orientation mechanism in which teachers tell children, I think you would be good for this, you would be good for that. And even though this is not binding, this orientation takes place. And in fact, what it turns out that is not a very, the way it works most of the time is that teachers look at the child and say, oh, this child is doing really well. Yes, I grade and so on. So I suggest that he goes for the college prep track. Or this guy is not doing that well, so then I suggest that he goes to the low track, potentially reinforcing the socioeconomic background kind of mechanism we know already about. And so we think that, by affecting their effort and their grades during the year, you could affect the final choice that they make. And this is kind of the main rationale for this, but Marco is going to talk about it. So I just wanted to give a motivation about it. And then, of course, we ask a bunch of things about, their parents, their education, their jobs, their siblings, in fact, how many siblings they have, what they do, and so on and so forth. This is wave 1. How do the other waves work? Well, a bunch of questions are repeated. Okay, so that's the whole point. But a bunch of questions try to add a little bit for us to be able to learn a little bit more about certain things. So for example, one of the criticisms I had in the previous data collection was that some of the outcomes I was asking about, the beliefs I was asking about, were about outcomes that, arguably are not really state of the words in the sense of being exogenous, but they are like endogenous in the sense that, I may do well in high school or not, it depends on how much effort I put in that, and so on and so forth, no? So what I'm trying to do here, I'm trying to unpack that a little bit by seeing how kids and parents think this production of grades and performance work. So how much that is due to effort, how much of that is due to innate ability, and so on and so forth. So for example, we asked this question in wave 3, which instead of, so in the previous data collection, this would be the question. So forget about this column. It was just say, for each curriculum of the available ones, tell me, either what the expected GPA is, or what is your subjective, the percent chance that you would have a GPA higher than some threshold, okay? So now, instead, we are asking that for different levels of effort. So to try to understand how they think that's generated. And we asked some of these questions for junior high school, but I let Marco speaking about that because it's the interaction part. And some of the questions instead refer to future experience in high school. Then, as I mentioned before, we have all these questions on friends and teachers, but I don't really want to talk about it. And then the last wave, as I said, is basically looking at all the exposed stuff. So we observe their choice, we ask them their choice set, and blah, 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 and so on and so forth. So let me skip to this part so that how much time do you have?
We have 10 minutes.
20 minutes. So I'm going to talk about 10 minutes more and then let Marco speak. Please.
When you're looking for peer effects?
Sorry?
When you ask about friends, are you looking for peer effects?
Eventually, that's the idea. So the way it works is like with the adult data structure. So whenever a school accepts to participate, potentially, we are after all children in 8th grade in that school, because the idea is that we want to maximize the probability that the friends are in the sample. And then we ask adult type of questions about who their friends are. And so then we observe what's the behavior of their friends. And also we ask questions. I can show you the question. We ask questions about, I don't know if I have the link though, let's see. I don't have the link. So basically what we ask is their subjective probability. So before the choice, we ask their subjective probability that each one of their best friends, 5, 10 best friends, choose different things. And then we ask them their sense of the distribution of choices in their class. And then we ask them, during the decision process, prospectively, so as a percent chance question. And then exposed, whether they know what their friends and classmates chose. And then the other thing we ask, which is different from adults, is whether they explicitly try to coordinate with some of their friends to go together in the same school and curriculum, to be together. So that's kind of the only question that is a bit different from the adult type of questions. But unfortunately, there is not a lot of time, so I decided to skip that part. But exactly, we are after kind of that kind of network, kind of structure, and the effect that peers have on each other. So the topic I wanted to focus on, one of the two topics I wanted to focus on, is the choice set formation of these kids. Okay, so we know that in the structure of random utility kind of models of discrete choice, there are two stages. There is a stage in which the decision problem is posed, which means a population of decision makers and the choice sets that they are facing. And then, given that, the choice is made from the available alternatives. Okay? Under revealed preference, we know that, well, there are a couple of things. So one thing is that in the basic classic model, the first stage is exogenous. So exogenous forces, nature, creates the population of decision makers and the choice sets that they face. And then conditional on that, decision makers make the choice. Under revealed preference assumption, the decision makers know everything about the alternatives and choose from the full set of alternatives. Of course, there is a literature, especially in I/O, marketing. I'm talking about applied literature, okay, in empirical literature, that have deviated from that and have recognized, for example, in brand choice and advertising type of applications, that there are thousands or hundreds of brands, and sometimes it's hard to know everything about all products and choose among and gather information about everything and so on. And so often people choose among even under unilateral decision making, people choose among a smaller set of alternatives, okay? And there are different explanations about what may be going on even under unilateral decision making. So one problem is that people may have limited information capacity. 5 minutes? 15, okay. May have limited information processing capacity, meaning they know everything about everything, but then it's too costly to solve the problem. No? And in cases that instead seem to be more, the literature seem to be more interested in and focus more on, it's really a problem of there is some sort of resolvable uncertainty. So it's about gathering information about the characteristics of the alternatives, people don't do it because it takes time, it's costly, and so on. And sometimes, in fact, it boils down to awareness. Like, people don't even know some of the alternatives exist. And there is this, for example, this nice paper by, I mean, both of these papers are very nice, but the second one really makes the point that that creates an identification problem because, you know, if there is heterogeneity in the choice set that people face, that heterogeneity needs to be accounted for because otherwise you can confuse it with heterogeneity in taste. So there is an identification. Sometimes certain channels, you know, for example, they make the example of other.
What probability of certain? What is
so this is, sorry, I should have explained that. So this is, imagine C is child C, okay? What's the probability that child C chooses alternative J? You can decompose it in the probability that he chooses alternative J conditional on a specific choice set out of the universe of all possible choice sets times the probability that this guy faces that choice set, okay? So the problem here is that if everybody faces, you know, if they face one specific choice set and it's the same for everybody, and the forces that pose that are exogenous is not a problem. But if different people face different choice sets, already there is a problem because especially when the way this choice set is formed have some similarities or interaction with the ways in which this is chosen, you can confuse basically heterogeneity in taste with heterogeneity in choice set, for example, among other things. So I give you an example about advertisement, for example. In this paper, they show that advertisement on brands have two effects. One effect works through preferences of the decision makers, and one effect works through awareness, through choice set. And if you don't model this explicitly or don't allow for this possibility, you're going to attribute. You're going to basically make biased inference on the preference parameters and possibly other parameters depending on your application. In their case would be price elasticity because it's a IO type of setting with firms making advertisements decisions.
Something exists as long as you have some data to explain. If preference and beliefs interact and the choice is the same, distinguishing between the two is irrelevant.
No, it's not irrelevant if you want to do counterfactual, if you want to do prediction, counterfactual analysis, and so on. If you think that you can have some policy that affects some channel, you know that policy is going to work through the channel but not through the other, or in different ways through different channels. And if you want to size the effect of that and understand how you, for example, in the previous research I was mentioning, the policy there was assume that there is some policy in which I can affect beliefs, but beliefs are separate from preferences. I need to distinguish between the two to be able to size the effect of that policy by providing information, for example, which could be true here, no? By providing information about the existence of certain alternatives, right? So, for example, I could mistakenly think that people don't care about certain features, certain certain characteristics of the alternative, and instead, or they care too much about them, but simply because, in fact, the truth is that they were constrained. They don't even know about certain alternatives. Okay, makes sense. So this is the motivation, and so how do we think about this in the child context? Well, it's true that it's not like brands, so we don't have 100 curricula. I mean, you're Italian, you know what the alternatives are, no? In the Italian system, there are not hundreds of alternatives, but these kids are 13, 14, and they may not know many things. So presumably, they know certain things because they know that their parents chose certain things when they were young. They know certain things because they speak with their friends and they know what their friends are thinking about. They know certain things because their teachers may tell them, these are the options, I suggest this, I suggest that. And we measure all of that in the survey. Both the initial condition and repeat. And this could help, are all possibilities in terms of why it is that they are aware about that, okay? So how the question looks like, you can imagine, is like, what curricula do you know or have you heard of at the beginning? And then we repeat these questions over waves. But then parents may have also another role, which is like, as I was saying before, may constrain their choice set, which is goes in the opposite dimension, so, direction, which means I could make certain choices just not available for them, instead of adding them to the choice set. And so we ask these questions.
Can you just question? So
Yeah.
suppose you get the sense that your parents would like you to go to, for example, the math.
Yeah.
Do you think that as that the parents restricting your choices, or do you think that it's part of your taste? You like
I asked two different questions. So I both asked what they think is their parents' preferences, and I asked them instead what curricula they think their parents may put the veto on. So they are to, their parents may prefer something. That doesn't mean that if the child comes in and say, I would like to do that, and they say no. They might still have a different preference, but allow the child to choose whatever they want. Or the child may come in and say, I would like to do that. No, you don't. Okay, so it's a different. And the reason why I'm doing this is that most of the models that we've seen in the literature on child-parent interaction, though it's a narrow literature, is that, even on peer effects, is that the role of parents, of peers and so on, it's almost always shows up in the utility, in some form of interdependent preferences, in some parameter that is in the utility function. Instead, here what I'm claiming is that that's certainly true, but there may be another channel, which is the choice set channel. Okay. Anyway, I just wanted to show you a couple of things. So as I was saying, I asked them this awareness question, both to children and to parents. I just wanted to show a little bit of pictures, but I should go fast because Marco needs to talk about, principal agent model. So what I wanted to show you that even if the main alternatives are not that many, they are 11, there is some, at least after 1 month of school, it's not that everybody knows everything. And this is both true for children and for parents. So this is the number of curricula. So I sum over curricula for each person, and I sum over the 3 categories. So for each category I sum how many curricula they say they know, how many curricula they say, I've heard of it, but I'm not really sure what that is about. And I've never heard of this. And you see that, they don't know everything. Parents seem to know a little bit more. Sorry, actually I should do this. Parents seem to know a little bit more. See, there are many less cases in which they say they never heard of, and it's higher the probability that they know all 11 of them. So they seem to know a little bit more, parents and children. And then I have a similar graph about, the subjective probability of being constrained. And yes, so again, there seems to be a lot of uncertainty in the sense that I divide in 4 categories, so whether they are sure that the parents would allow or not allow them to make certain choices, or whether they are unsure and then they give me the % chance. And there seems to be a lot of that going on. But I leave the ground to Marco because time is.
What I'll try to do is to make the case that although you may more or less be interested in the choice of curriculum in Italy, there is some value in this data that can help us to assess, to attack some usual problems that we have in estimating games. And in particular, there's going to be some value in, I think, this data in try to help us to do a couple of things. The first is to try to, so we saw before Matthias presented a paper. It was a very simple paper. I wrote myself games on parent-child interaction. There is a paper by Joe Otts, which is kind of a different structure. And the reality is that we do recognize that parent-child interaction is important to understand certain outcomes, such as human capital, curriculum choice, as the result of interaction, but The truth is that we don't know much about the real structure, okay, that we should superimpose on the game and then to use the model to interpret the data. Okay, so this is always true. This is particularly true, I think, for parent-child interaction. And so let me just say this, then I'll go back. And so essentially, we don't know a bunch of stuff. We don't know what is, for instance, much of the relationship with effort and grades. This is more of a standard kind of question, but we do have data on effort and grades. Most importantly, there is a very popular model in this problem, which is the moral hazard kind of model, in which there is a problem of hidden action, in which the parent cannot observe, the action of the child. You don't know how much is studying in your room, but one question is it really the case? Can I really instead monitor very well and have a fair assessment of what he's doing? We don't know much about this. In general, we don't know if the problem of hidden action coexists with the problem of hidden state. Maybe I don't know something about my child. I don't know how smart he is. I don't know how much he's, I don't know his preferences for leisure. I may not know his preferences for human capital. I may not know, as Flavio was saying before, the technology, and vice versa. This is paper by Giustinelli, in which the child doesn't know the preferences for parenting style of the child. So we don't really know what is the real information structure underlying this interaction. And of course, usually we do some sensitive assumption that permit us to make this issue tractable. And so I think that this data, and then of course we don't know if parents and children are able to commit to a certain course of action. So should we write down a principal agent model with full commitment, or should we just work with the dynamic game? We don't know that. Okay, so very different modeling approach, and I think that I'll show you later the data we have, but I think we have a lot of information on this. Okay, so we ask essentially this. So we ask measures of how much the child works. We ask how much the parent believes that the child is working. We elicit beliefs on the preferences of the opponent. Okay. So what I want to say is that not only there is this, when I estimate the parent-child game, not only there is this standard kind of problem that you have also in individual decision problem. Once you add this interaction, there's an extra layer, which is the beliefs about the other people's beliefs, and we elicit that. Okay, so we just to give you a preview. So we have, in terms of grades, we have realized grades, then we have expected grades, and then we have targeted grades. So how much the parent think that the child should get in a certain at the end of the 8th grade. And then we have data on the preferences for each curriculum. So then,
you then go back afterwards and ask them if they actually carried out these tracks, or
I don't retrospectively. You mean if they cared about?
One thing is you ask people, oh yeah, what incentive signals are up to your child. Who knows?
Let me. I have a slide on incentives. So okay, I have 0 minutes. But so just to go back, let me just give 1 minute. Okay. So when it comes to principal agent model, we essentially, the added value of this is that we ask two things. Okay, I would like to have in mind these two things. First of all, we ask very detailed information on monetary incentives. Essentially, we reconstruct, this is something I couldn't do in my job market paper, but we reconstruct essentially the budget constraint of a teenager. We know, the money gets for certain performances, the money gets for work, and then the way that this money is used for consumption. Most importantly, this is really the added value of this for estimation of gains. We elicit the strategies. Okay? Both the strategies that the parent will implement, that is, how much money are you going to give to your child if he gets a grade in this range, and the beliefs that the child has about the strategy of the parent. Okay? So this is really the key problem with this is that usually when we estimate games, there is some unobservable. First of all, the effort. This is typical estimation problem, in moral hazard problem. We don't observe the effort, and we do. But we also have the strategy. This means that in some sense we can sort of, say, non-parametrically identify the beliefs, right? Because, say, the deviation from the actual strategy and the conjecture strategy is a measure of beliefs, okay? So this is the typical problem in estimating game with asymmetric information. If we do found in the data that there is a lot of uncertainty about the opponent's type, then this data can help us to estimate the equilibrium beliefs, okay? So this is kind of, I think, the general value of this data. Then there is, these are the data, the tables that I had. I don't have the time. This is the problem that maybe I can tell you later. This is the standard principal agent model, and I want to tell you a little bit more about possible approach to estimate the primitives of this game using our data. So in this sense, we have a more general problem that Mattia said, standard principal agent model with asymmetric information in which the parent needs to choose a strategy. There is uncertainty about the child's type, and then there is a standard participation constraint, a standard incentive compatibility constraint. Given the data, how can we identify the primitives of the problem? But this is going to be another probably. So now I'll leave Joe talk, and I think if you have questions. So this is just the conclusions. Yeah.